In the previous video, I introduced you to the concept of object and mesh data blocks, and for example, how the object or mesh transformation affects them. In this video, I would like to go a little bit more into different ways how we could manipulate our objects or mesh. It's pretty much the same. So I will go a little bit more in detail into the different pivot points we have and how they work, and also how, for example, the snap system works. So let's go ahead and create one cube. Let's open this transform window here, and you know that by, for example, typing in 1, we can adjust the position of the object. So let's add another cube and then click on the red arrow and the Y. And we can also Shift D, make a copy, then you instantly get into the move mode or grab, and then left mouse button click and we can position it. So the command to move something, or by clicking on the arrows, is actually G, so it's grab. Whenever you press G, you can click it. To rotate something, it's R. And to scale something, click an object and press S. Okay. And I will move my mouse to the upper left corner because I would like to show you that you see there is a readout of how much I scale this one or how much I rotate this one. So this is the current rotation amount, and here on the left side you see the final rotation amount. This object had already -17 rotation. And then when I press G, there you see, for example, the distance I moved this. Okay, so basic commands to transform: G for grab, R for rotate, and S for scale. And obviously you can also use the manipulators or the 3D widgets. I don't necessarily switch between them a lot because I would have to always go to here. I do this with shortcuts. However, I like actually just having the move one turned on, so this one I will use most of the time. Okay, so let's rotate the view a little bit because I would like to show you now how we can do a little bit more precise manipulation. So I mentioned when I go into this one, then I see the 3D widget, and then I can rotate, for example, only along the Y or X axis, but if I then want to go and move, I have to go back. And this is just way too much mouse movement. With Shift, obviously, and then left mouse button click, I can turn on the visibility of all others, but then my 3D widget is pretty heavy, so it's not very good. So I would like to move this one only along the Y axis. And Blender is actually pretty nice in this case. So G is for move. So you don't have to press the mouse button, but you press G, and then instantly you can move this around. Now I would like this to only move along the Y axis. So simply press, don't hold, just press single one, the Y key. And now I can move it along the Y. If I press X, it is X, or Z, it's along Z. I can actually Shift Z, exclude the Z, so I can now move it along X and Y at the same time. Everybody who knows SketchUp a little bit, this is quite similar to. But I find here the locking is much better solved. So let's go back to Y. So you see you can always switch between all those different axes, and I'm still in move command. And now I would like this one to, for example, go exactly 2 meters. My unit system currently in metric, so I can press 2. 2 is equal 2 meters. Minus 2 meters, minus again. So on the keyboard, 2 meters, minus or plus. Now, just with minus, you switch between negative and positive value. 0.5. Now I move this one 2.5 meters. I don't really like this distance, so I can press the delete key, type in 4, what about maybe should be 1.4. So with the arrow keys on the keyboard, and again pay attention to what I'm doing up here, I can move in front of the 4 and then type in 1 and dot, it's 1.4. And when I'm good, press enter. So let's say I would like to move this one 50 centimeters up. So G for grab, Z for the axis, and then dot 5, 50 centimeters. One of the recent additions in Blender, which is actually pretty nice, is besides having the ability to switch between metric and imperial, and for metric a meter is always the default, I can switch now, let's say, to centimeters. Specifically in industrial design, we work a lot in smaller scale. Well, if you work in exhibit design or a car, maybe not, but most of the time meters is just too big. So now when I press G and Z and then 5, because I'm in centimeters now, 5 is equal 5 centimeters. So I don't have to type in 0.05 for 5 centimeters, because 0.05 meters equal 5 centimeters. I can just simply type in 5, hit enter, and I'm good. And now you see here, the height is at 5.5 centimeters. I'm just curious how this works. Okay, and let's set this to 0, there, G, Z, and 5 centimeters. Yeah, perfect. Good. And here with the separate units, if, for example, we say plus 5 millimeters, you see you can actually do basic math calculations. The whole object is moved up and then the units are being broken apart, or you can just keep it together. Up to you how you want to work. So if we do a rotation R and Y and 25, also there everything works. Perfect. Scale, let's say S and 2, we scale it by a factor of 2, so we make it double as big. Now I want to go back to the original scale. S and not 1, because it's the same scale, but S and then dot 5, and then scales it to 50% of the last stage back to 1 meter. Also here we can say S and Z along the Z axis, or S and Shift Z, scale along Y and X, exclude Z. Pretty perfect, you see? Good. Okay, so these two I will delete, Shift D and Shift D, make some copies. Because we covered kind of like the basic manipulation and how the transformations work, local and global, you know already. Okay, so let's pay attention to the 3D widget and where it's positioned. You see it always moves to the selected object, but when I select 2, you see it's in between. And now when I press R for rotate, you see it rotates around this point. If I select this one, rotation will be there. Also a small tip, don't move your cursor closer here and then rotate, because as you can see it's kind of crazy. Always have your cursor when you do a rotation. You can move easily your cursor away after you pressed R, but then you see I have more screen space, so I can do a much finer rotation. And then the closer I get to the rotation center, the quicker the steps are. Okay. This is actually called bounding box. And you see there is a bounding box drawn around these 3 elements, and then the geometrical center, there we have it. Let's say we go with individual origin, and then we press R. Now you see each object rotates around its own individual object center point. If I press S, you see they all individually scale. If I go back to bounding box, I scale them all away from the center or towards the bounding box center. There's also median point, that's kind of like a different center point. Then we have active element. You see this cube is red, is white, and the others are orange because number 1, active. Number 2, this is active, that's selected. Number 3, active, selected, selected. Now if I press R, you see everything rotates around that object. If I scale, it scales to the object or rotates this way. Okay, good. So you see that with the active element, always the last selected object then will be the pivot point for transformations. And then we have 3D cursor. So the 3D cursor is like a three-dimensional reference point we can move around actually via multiple ways. First, we go to 3D cursor. We can say put this 3D cursor at 4 centimeters. And now when I press S, let's go to side view, you see everything scales to that 3D cursor. If I press R, everything rotates around that 3D cursor. G doesn't really do anything because we just move everything. Okay. I could also say this point, Shift S, cursor to the selected. This is actually the point. Then leave edit mode, U, and then R and Y and U. Now you see everything rotates around as it looks like it rotates around the vertex of that cube I selected, but I simply selected the vertex so I can snap my 3D cursor to it because for pivot point I use the 3D cursor. So you see the 3D cursor is not necessarily only useful for positioning an insert marker. Let's say I would like to have a sphere at that position there. So, the sphere was created right where that 3D cursor is, but I can also use it to quickly say you, please rotate around the 3D cursor or even scale to it. Okay. Blender actually does not necessarily have align commands in the way how other programs do align. We can do a lot of the align simply with the scale command. So it's a different workflow, but pretty much the same result. So with this, I will start also showing you how we can align and then objects and then how we can use the snap system. So first, let's say those two cubes I would like to be at the same position like this one, and this cube currently is not really well positioned. So let's practice a little bit of clean working. This is at the world center, and then let's say this one should be rotated 45 degrees, and this should maybe be 3 centimeters off the ground. Okay, so I would like those to be at the same position like there, let's say height-wise. So how can I do this? There are multiple ways. I know this is at 3 centimeters. So I can select this one and say 3, select this one and say 3. Works. Two objects, not a big deal. But let's say you have 10. You don't really want to do this 10 times. It's going to drive you crazy. So what we do instead of just left mouse button clicking into this, we can press and hold the Alt key, then click in here, release the Alt key, type in 3, press enter, And now those two objects, or all objects I selected, when I press the Alt key and then I do a transform manipulation, it applies it not only to the active but all selected objects. Perfect. So let's say I would like this one, all those should be along the y-axis at a nice position. So U and U. And now I select this one, because I could also go to Y, right mouse button, and then say copy to single to selected. So it copies the single Y to the selected instead of saying copy X, Y, and Z. For example, the rotation here is wrong, rotation there is wrong. Select this one and then say, hey, right mouse button, copy single to selected. Okay. I will rotate this, whoops, one step furthermore, bloop, and then U. And then you see this one has multiple rotations. So right mouse button, copy all to selected. And you see now it copied X, Y, and Z. Again, I hope you start seeing why the object mode and edit mode is so important to understand, because you can easily align things. For example, in some other parametric programs, I find this very annoying that, for example, you do not have the same object-based transformation abilities, because this is very, very useful when you do something like an assembly, but you still are in the explorative phase. Okay, all objects I want to reset, so Alt, left mouse button click 0, Alt, left mouse button click 0, Alt, left mouse button click 45, done. See? Very nice. Okay, so this one may be 3. This is actually on the negative side of 3, so -3. So now I have lined up all objects nicely along the x-axis and the y-axis and the z-axis, and with equal spacing. Okay. But let's say you would like to align this one with a little bit of snapping. So we can snap to a vertex, we can snap to an edge, and we can snap to a face. I actually work with vertex a lot because those are the vertices you can use as a snap reference. And this also maybe now shows why I prefer only working with the translate 3D widget being visible. So you see now I can move this one up and down. And the hotkey to turn on the snap permanently is Shift Tab, as you can see. But when I click the Z key, so I'm in transform along the Z axis, and then I press and hold the control key, you see it snaps to these parts. Go down. Now it doesn't snap to down there, because this one, how should the software now should snap to there? It snaps this one to there because they're closer. So ideally move it down, so a little bit away, and then the first element from this one will snap to this one. Vice versa, I want this one to snap to there. So move it above and then bring it down. Perfect. You see? Also here. So let's say the stuff is somewhere here. So in 3D space, I can move this one up and snap along the y-axis. Let's take a look. There. Fits as well. Perfect. So the snapping and orientation works really well in 3D space by making use of the transform or translation widget, and then by pressing Control and holding it, you can then move it and snap to certain positions. Let's say I would like this one to snap actually to there, so they are next to each other, and then I can just simply press G, so I move it freely, and then I hold the control key, left mouse button click, done. Press G, move closer. I could also go to there, and then press and hold the control key, and I'm done. And you see, very easy to manipulate everything. And you see also there, I just moved it first a little bit to where I wanted to snap to, and then I snapped. So with face, so what does face maybe mean? Let's make this one a little bit smaller. Let's move it maybe to there. And face and snap. And you see, it snaps actually onto the face. There. So you can then this way position or place an object directly onto another object. And there are even functions, for example, to rotate it. So let's say it's a curved surface, then it would snap to the face and even rotate the object for you. So quite fantastic. Okay, so that was that part. Let's delete all this. And to bring this to an end, I would like to go back to vertex, and then I will show you how we do the other alignments with mesh mode. So this point I can move down, and let's say I would like this one to snap to this point. I can move this one up and then press and hold control, and it snaps. Okay, goodie. Let's say I have these 2 points, U and U. I had face selector turned on. And I would like both to quickly line up. So there's one way. I can go to view, where I can see the other view, hold control, move the mouse cursor to the snap target, release the left mouse button, and then release control. Perfect, works. However, I mentioned before that we don't necessarily have align tools, kind of like in Illustrator, where you say all you align along vertically or horizontally. We can simply do this with the scale tool. So when you press S to scale, and I want to adjust these 2 selected points along the Z-axis so they are horizontally on the same level. So when I press S, and you see I can scale them towards each other or away. You see? Well, that's not what I want. What I want is scale along Z and scale along the Z-axis only. You see now I scale them away from each other, but I want to do the opposite. And the trick is really pay attention to the scale value up here. You see the moment they get very close to be horizontal, the scale value reaches 0. So the trick to make something horizontal, or for example vertical, is in our case horizontal. I scale along the Z-axis, press 0, and then press enter. Let's say this one is a little bit off. So now we are in a top view. So S, Y, and 0. See? Perfect. But now this one moved a little bit, not a big deal. I can move it and realign it via snapping. Let's say all those 3 points I would like to line up in a line, and instantly this point should remain being there. Well, at this point then, for example, I can go back to active element and say scale along the Y to 0. You can see then the other 2 points were moved to there, and this point remained where it is. Now let's say vertically all those should be the same, S, Y, S, Z, and 0. U, S, and 0. For example, moved it up, undo, S, Y, and 0, moved it over. While we're in edit mode, you're also able to, for example, snap the geometry I selected to the geometry of a different object. So we can press G and then move, let's say we move this point to there, hold Control and snap G and move this to there. This point I would like to be at the midpoint. How do I do this? Let's move this first to there. G, move to there. Okay. So, this point I would like to be perfectly between these two lines, but how do I figure this out? It's actually very easy. There are multiple ways how we can do it, and I will show you the first and then a second one. The first one will actually be to make use of our 3D cursor. So I have a selection, 2 lines. Shift S, cursor to selected, positions the 3D cursor at the midpoint between the selection or of the selection. Now I can select the other point, for example, move it away, and then say Shift S, selection to the cursor. And there it is. Now this point was positioned at the cursor, and because the cursor is at the midpoint of these 2 points, it is perfectly centered. So that was one way. The other way is actually via sliding. So every edge has, let's say, a certain length and in percent. So with G we're going to grab, but if you press G a second time, you go what's called vertex slide. So let's say I want this point to slide over along this edge to this point. So I can press GG. It's not good game, but GG, slide. You can move it over, and you see actually up here where my mouse is, there it says vertex slide 0.9, and that is because 1 is actually the full amount of the one side. You see here this is 0 now, so that's the midpoint, and there it's 1. Okay, so let's say we start with something like this, and I would like to quickly bring this over instead of using the snap command. So I can GG, slide it over, GG, and then type in 0.5. And there it is. So 0 was actually this, 1 is the other side, so by logic 0.5 is the midpoint. So let's say I would like to move this point down to here 50%, so it finds this midpoint. Again, I could go this way, or I could say GG, and you see now this is 0.5, so 0.5, there it is. But let's say we want to go back. Now you see there's no edge or so, but even there I could say GG, bring it over, GG, 0.5, there, I'm back. Okay. And this is basically how to align, position, and snap objects and mesh data in a nutshell. There's obviously more to it, but this being the beginning of the semester and only an introduction into how to use Blender for industrial design, I will keep this rather brief. But through the following exercises and then specifically the design projects, I will demonstrate to you more workflows or approaches and also introduce more tools to you. This also means that it's very imperative that you follow these videos and really try to understand everything I show, because everything I will demonstrate to you in the upcoming projects will be based on this.